Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University.
Hello, dear students and viewers. I'm Jai Javani, and I welcome you at our Chaitanya studio on behalf of Department of English, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad. Today, we have Dr. Deep Trivedi with us. He will be talking on Jumpha Lahiri's text that is there in the syllabus. Before we start the lecture, I would like to briefly introduce Sir. He has done his PhD on diaspora writing, as well as his research area. His research interest lies in diaspora writing as well as Indian writing in English. He is an associate professor. He is heading the Department of English at IIT Gandhinagar. We welcome you at our studio, sir.
Thank you. Hello friends, Namaste. Today we will be discussing The Lowland by Jumpha Lahiri. I am Dr. Deep Trivedi and I am Associate Professor of English at Indian Institute of Teacher Education. When it comes to Jumpha Lahiri, we should know that she is a recognized name, particularly in the domain of writing, that is diaspora writing. And that is where she has earned the maximum amount of fame, and she is well established as a writer these days. If we talk about Jumpha Lahiri, let us see through her biography that she is the daughter of an Indian family, and they moved from the state of West Bengal, and she was born in London but raised in the United States, and her father worked as a librarian at the University of Rhode Island. After studying creative writing, particularly in comparative literature and also Renaissance studies at Boston, at Boston University, Lahiri began a kind of, you can say, distinguished record of publication with her debut short story collection, which was quite famous, that is Interpreter of Melodies, and that won the Pulitzer Prize for the year 2000, that was for fiction. And Lahiri's first novel, The Namesake, was published in the year 2003, and later that was also adapted into a film in 2007. Lahiri has frequently published stories in the prestigious New Yorker magazine throughout her career. And in 2014, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal for her contribution to American letters. As of 2015, Jumpha Lahiri writes fiction and non-fiction, primarily in Italian, a language she taught herself. She began feeling exiled from the English language. That's probably the common problem with a number of diaspora writers, that they try to stay away from that feeling of being exiled. So yes, she has also contributed to Italian. Then let us now talk about the writing that she usually comes out with as core element within her writing. You find that mostly or quite often her writings are autobiographical in nature, because things come through her own life experiences. And being a daughter to an immigrant family, she has that exposure of being part of number of cultures, number of countries, number of systems rather, we should say, and focuses on immigration, assimilation, and cultural differences being some of the core observations that any writer would emphasize upon, particularly representing the diaspora nature of writing. So Lahiri's overall exposure has shaped her into a very promising writer that has the capacity to bring about fiction to the level of that energy, wherein you do find contemporary things well attached to even some of the events that occurred in the recent past, and that's the magic that her writings hold. And she also happens to mention, as you can see on your screen, she wrote somewhere that I hear sentences as I am starting out the window, or chopping vegetables, or waiting on a subway platform alone. Lahiri said of her writing process in a 2012 interview with the New York Times, "They are pieces of jigsaw puzzle handed to me in no particular order, with no discernible logic. I only sense that they are part of the thing." So that's the idea of essence of her writing. That's how she carries herself in the process of writing, and that's how she sees her. Now friends, let us talk about the historical context of the Lowland before we talk about the procedural part of the novel. Let us try to understand what nature of historical context it carries. So what do we have as historical context of the Lowland? It is important to understand that she by birth represents a Bengali family background, and the turbulences of 1960s and 1970s India is at the forefront of the Lowland. Even as the novel moves temporarily past the early days of the Naxalite movement and the splintering of the Communist Party of India, that is usually taken as Marxist Party of India, into the Communist Party of India, that is Marxist-Leninist. The extreme physical and ideological violence of the period, it resonates throughout the lives of Subhash, the characters that we are talking about, Gauri, and indeed their daughter Bela, though she is raised in a foreign country, ostensibly removed from the painful truth of her family's very personal involvement with the violence and terrorism of the Naxalites. The movement which grew out of, the entire Naxalite movement that grew out of the CPI or ML's support for the peasants of Naxalbari, sharecroppers who rose up against the unfair and predatory practices of the upper classes, who drove them off their land and yet forced them to continue working it without profit, threatened the city of Calcutta and the state of West Bengal as well. The presence, or you can say the entire movement of the Naxalite treatment was disturbing in many ways, but more widely into the state itself it was felt. Those who supported Maoist ideals of anti-imperialism and the overthrow of landowners and landlords attempted to spread radical communist ideology throughout the territory. Though quelled in the early 1970s, the Naxalite movement has resurfaced throughout the decades, entering into violent conflict with the Indian government even in the year 2018, which is not exactly much in the past. We are talking about something quite contemporary because we are referring to the year 2018. Other books related to the Lowland could be considered as accountable for primary exposure. We can take up Neil Mukherjee's 2014 novel, The Lives of Others. You may even note down these titles. Is also set in West Bengal in the 1960s and features a protagonist who abandons his prosperous life in Calcutta to join the Naxalite movement after being radicalized by witnessing the extreme poverty and destructive, what do we call it, destructive lingering feudalism of the countryside. We can take up the example of even Arundhati Roy's 2011 book, Walking with the Comrades. That also provides a kind of non-fictional account of the enduring struggles between the Indian state and the Naxalite movement, a battle which she describes as one for the soul of India. So that these things probably you can go for one-time reading. I mean, they give you some account of understanding regarding the set of actions that were practiced by the Naxalites. If we talk about the novel, The Lowland, it was written early in the 2010s, and that was published in the year 2013, we can say. And what do we have is a novel that is more contemporary in its tone, treatment, but also has some amount of history from the recent past of India. And basically it is a literary fiction. We should know that it is fiction. It's not exactly a non-fiction account of events. Settings are Calcutta, West Bengal, particularly India, Rhode Island, that is based in USA. Climax is about decades after abandoning her life in Rhode Island. Gauri Mitra, the character, returns to personally hand a set of signed divorce papers to Subhash, only to come face to face with their daughter Bela. It's very difficult to pronounce these days or categorize these days who is the protagonist, who is the antagonist, who is the villain. I mean, you can't literally classify the things when it comes to fiction of this nature, because you see, the modern day, rather postmodern fiction is all about something that we call perspectives. There are a number of perspectives to a particular novel, a set of dialogue it offers, and then there are a number of things which we derive as extracts through such novels, which have altogether a different potential to talk about. So Gauri Mitra is seen as antagonist. If you talk about the point of view, then there are various point of views. It's not limited to one particular point of view. And we should know that the novel was treated as award worthy. The Lowland also received the DSC prize for South Asian literature in 2014, and it was also placed on some short and long lists for the Man Booker Prize, the National Book Award, and the Bailey's Women's Prize. So it was certainly taken as into consideration for multiple awards. Drawn from life, it actually, we should know that the novel is nothing but it has been through the life of the protagonist. I mean, more or less it comes through a number of autobiographical observations also, we can say. So the protagonist of The Lowland, Subhash Mitra, travels from West Bengal to Rhode Island to work at a university in Providence. The university is unnamed throughout the book, but the university is not much too difficult to recognize, because Jumpha Lahiri's father, he worked at the University of Rhode, Rhode Island, and the place where Lahiri's own father happened to work as within a part of the academics. He was actually an immigrant from the West Bengal, and he worked there in the University of Rhode Island as librarian. And also, uh, Rhode Island is one of the settings within Larry's best known piece of short fiction, the short story called The Third and Final Continent. So you do find some amount of connection with the place when you talk about the lowland. And if you talk about the novel within the scope of review, it has kind of personal and political contexts, that they are to be neated here, and they are presented in beautiful contexts by Jumpha Lahiri, and in a very effective manner, rather I should say. uh, it was longlisted for even Booker Prize as a second novel. And we should know that police clash with political activists in Kolkata, uh, they are somewhere in the background, if not clearly mentioned. Lahiri asks here through the novel that whether violence against the state is justified in the name of revolution. Is it fair enough to call violence a rightful act? That is the question that you find within the scope of review once you read through the novel. The immigrant experience is always fertile ground for fiction, and Jumpha Lahiri is somebody who is born in London uh, to some Bengali parents and raised in Rhode Island, and has built her literary career exploring the territory as it relates to characters of the Indian origin in America, with all the attendant questions of, of within the context, I would say, like identity, loyalty, memory, and even reinvention. Her reputation is firmly established as one of the leading fiction writers of her generation. You see, the writers, they represent specific generations, and Jumpha is a big name these days. Her debut collection, The Interpreter of Maladies, it won her the Pulitzer Prize. Also, a Pan Hemingway Award it received. And not only that, I mean, altogether, this entire novel, it was also I mean, the work was well listed through the New Yorker Best Prize, a New Yorker Prize for the best first book. That was also another credit to the work. Her second novel, The Lowland, has already been longlisted for 2013 Man Booker Prize, as we talked about earlier. So, how do you exactly see the novel? That very opening of the novel, or the very beginning of the novel, is exciting. You are curious to see how exactly the novel is going to take you further in some ride of ideas. So the Lowland is a kind of sweeping, ambitious story that examines in intimate detail the intersection of the political and the personal, encompassing nearly 50 years of Indian and American history through the lives of one family. The novel basically ripples out from the beginnings of the Naxalite uprising. It refers to that part, and particularly based in the West Bengal in 1967. Two brothers, Subhash and Udayan Mitra, are attracted by the radical communist ideas, rather the movement, while at the university in Calcutta. But somehow we get to know that Subhash is more cautious and sensible of the two, and he quickly perceives the danger that is involved, and he withdraws, leaving to study in the United States. Udayan left behind, he remained there only, and becomes more entrenched in the militant politics, believing that violence against the state is justified in the name of revolution. Now, is this is where, as readers, we get to have the feeling to understand if there is a scope of revolt within the state of India, and if there is some scope of revolt, then what should be its face like? What should be its nature? What should be its treatment? So there are two opposites presented here in the name of two brothers. So we have two brothers. One parted parted ways from the communist ideology and moves to the United States, and the other brother is someone who maintained his faith in the movement, the Naxalite movement, observing something in a altogether different way, condemning the government, and also opining that violence against the state is justified, and this is nothing but revolution. This is what the other brother, Udayan, believes in. It's not exactly much of a spoiler to reveal that early on, let us say, he is arrested and executed by the police on the Lowland behind their parents' suburban house, supposedly for his part in a violent crime. You see, any form of violence in any country would be seen as a crime, and Udayan had given his life to a movement that had been misguided, that had caused only damage, that had already been dismantled. The only thing he had altered was what their family had been. So the novel pivots on this movement, rather I should say this very situation of Udayan's death. He leaves behind a young widow, that is the character of Gauri, a fellow student already in the early stages of pregnancy, out of a sense of duty to his brother and to save her from a life of drudgery in Calcutta. Subhash marries Gauri and takes her back to Rhode Island. So you need to see the relationship first when you read through the novel, and the causes that pose certain situation for the members of the family. Therefore, the sake of property, they maintain the fiction that he's her daughter's father, though the lie slowly corrodes their fragile marriage. Now here we need to understand that Lahiri's writing is notable for its restraint and also understatement. She resists lyricism just as she avoids obvious drama. Until the very end of the book, that is the novel, every major upheaval, death, betrayal, violence, everything happens off stage and is recounted as second hand. Here, if we see, instead, she concentrates on the minutiae of relationships between brothers, say the characters actually there, between husbands and wife, and between parents and children, and on the deep reverberations these dramatic moments create in ordinary lives. But she also quietly, without sensationalism, draws attention to the post independence India, in which the Naxalite movement was born. The desperate poverty that had led many young idealists, I'm using the word idealists, to see revolutionary violence and self sacrifice as the only solution. And that was the danger. It's a chapter of history, that we get to have the opportunity to go through, which was overlooked by the West. As Gauri learns when she comes to Rhode Island, she says that there was nothing about Calcutta, what had consumed the city, what had altered the course of her life, and it had shattered it, was not reported here. There was no mentioning. The point of reference is that there was no mentioning of what happened back there in Calcutta. I mean, the international reference was not made. Lahiri structures the novel with exquisite precision, building atmosphere through cumulative detail, parsing out the backstory as Gauri and Subhash allow themselves to revisit memories from their youth, so that it is only towards the end, that comes at the end only, that we learn about the full truth of Udayan's death. A truth that asks us to revise our opinions of the characters and their actions. So the conclusion is very interesting. At the end of the novel, we are forced to rethink on what was right, what was wrong. And this is especially true of Gauri, the book's most vivid character, one of the most effective character, a woman born ahead of her time, unsuited both by temperament and intellect to the conventions, the way they were demanded by her culture. Now, culture is a very interesting thing here. You need to understand we have cultures within different states, and they solicit certain amount of behavior in certain ways. So she wasn't exactly a perfect fit there, and she reinvents herself most fully in the more liberated atmosphere, milieu rather, of the United States. But this forging of a new self comes at a terrible cost of her family. That came at a very costly engagement to her family. Subhash calls her cold-hearted. But Lahiri's insight into the inner conflict of a woman is one interesting inquiry you find in this novel. Who chooses her? A woman who chooses her intellectual life over the demands of motherhood is unsparing and beautifully rendered. This commentary in that case is valid if you talk about the Lowland. Perhaps Lahiri, she spreads her net a little too wide at times. There are sudden excursions into the viewpoint of Subhash's mother, of Udayan, characters who have previously existed through the eyes of others. While Bela, the daughter, in the family, feels a little indistinct, we can use the word indistinct. Her crucial formative years somewhat glossed over until she returns as an adult. But there is no doubt that the Lowland as a novel, it confirms Lahiri as a writer of formidable powers and great depth of feeling, who makes the business of conjuring a story from the chaos of human lives, they seem quite effortless. So the narrative skills that she applies, and the way she happens to talk about the characters within, and the way she develops a story through the relationships that are beautifully knitted, you do realize that she has excelled that art. Brothers that you have in the novel, Subhash and Uday and Mitra, they are growing up in Calcutta. If we talk about the very process, or rather the flow of the narration in the novel. So Subhash and Uday and Mitra, they are growing up in Calcutta. That is how it begins in probably 1960s. Yes, their neighborhood, Tollygung, is full of refugees whose lives were displaced by the very unfortunate instance in the history of very unfortunate incident, rather a mishap in the history of India, that of 1947 partition. So the refugee, they used to surround around that location. So the partition of India is one of the parts of discussion within the novel, because it somehow takes us back to 1960s. But the boys, Subhash and Uday, they themselves live in a kind of modest middle class home, which sits on the edge of a stretch of land occupied by 2 ponds. So there are 2 ponds around their location, and between the 2 ponds there is a lowland. So there is a space in between the two ponds, which floods in the monsoon. As we can understand, rainy seasons, they cause flood. The boys are 1 year apart in age and inseparable. The older, that is more reserved, that is Subhash, often finds himself roped into trouble by his younger and rather more impulsive brother, Udayan. In the course of the novel, we find that as the boys enter their collegiate years and attend separate local universities, they don't go to the same universities. They don't go to the same university, they go to two different universities. They begin to drift apart from the first time in their lives. So they were not exactly separate till they moved to university education. Udayan falls in with a group of radicals. That is how the novel describes. Associated with the Communist Party of India, that is Marxist-Leninist ideology that it follows. A splinter group of the Communist Party of India, with ties to the neighboring, rather I should say, bourgeoisie of Naxalite movement, that to make sure that it reaches to maximum extent within the society. It was a movement, a violent uprising, originally started by poor sharecroppers in the state of West Bengal, a village of Naxalbari. And amid the violence and the unrest which prevailed during those years, Udayan devotes his days and nights to CPI, ML activities, while Subhash, somehow he goes for further reading, and he prefers to pursue a PhD in America. So Udayan begs Subhash not to leave India, but Subhash feels, or rather I should say, he's now in a different engagement of looking at his own life in a different set of environment. So Subhash feels that disconnect, rather a kind of distance between himself and his brother, and that is already too wide to bridge. You do realize at that particular juncture of the novel, you do realize that. In America, Subhash attends university in Rhode Island, and there only he is one of the only Indian students. He's one of the those faces that can be seen as migrant faces. His feelings of isolation increase. They maximize. This is about the very diasporic experience. Jumpha Lahiri is very good at bringing about or encompass these experiences within her novel, and through the character of Subhash, we get to have that reading of isolation, that feeling of isolation or feeling of being exiled, or rather a misfit. So there is a kind of increase when a letter from Udayan arrives. That feeling reaches to another extreme when Udayan happens to write something to his brother saying that he has gone against their parents' wishes for an arranged marriage, and he has chosen to marry a woman named Gauri. So he informs his brother, because those two have had a long tenure of bonding between them, and that for the sake of love, that is what he says, that for the sake of love he is getting married to Gauri, and somehow the parents are not exactly in agreement to that marriage. Subhash, who had been proud of himself for taking a bold new step in moving to America, feels as if his bold steps were defeated by Udayan all over again. Because Udayan's temperament is different. It is presented in a very different manner. So he feels that my bold and blunt decisions have been again defeated by Udayan, having that revolutionary zeal being very much a part of his personality. So throughout his second year of graduate school, Subhash, he fields frequent letters from Udayan asking when Subhash is going to come home and allow their parents to arrange a marriage for him. The letters almost never mention anything that Udayan was associated with, that is Naxalbari or any radical politics at all. More or less, the letters were between the two brothers, so it maintained that tone. They exchanged, Udayan always wrote something that was very much a part of a brother's personality, a brother's concern. So Subhash is, and Subhash he is relieved that his brother has settled down, with that marriage. He has settled down, and it appears through the letters that the Naxalite movement is no more a priority for his brother. Subhash becomes involved with a young married white woman, namely her name is Holly, and though he knows the relationship is not tenable in the long term, that may not be feasible, to sustain that relationship. He is heartbroken when Holi ends their affair. So at the end of summer, a letter arrives from Calcutta, conveying Subhash, telling Subhash that Udayan has been killed and urging him to come home as soon as possible. So this letter was dropped like a missile, and somehow for Subhash this was quite disturbing to accept that his brother has been. I mean, there was no sign of Udayan's getting involved with the radical movements, and he was at some kind of rest. He was thinking that his brother is no more involved into anything that is mischievous. But then the later shook him with sadness and surprise, that how could it be possible that he has been killed? For what reason he has been killed? So his presence is expected at his native. So Subhash returns to Calcutta, and that to find it completely changed by the violence of the Naxalites. The scene was different when he returns to India, and somehow that state of affairs did not appear much too pleasant, or the atmosphere was not much too normal. Rather, it appeared to be more disturbing, and Subhash realizes that his brother had never given up his radical politics. That time he could somehow he could understand why his brother could have been murdered. He reaches to that understanding that his brother never detached himself from any form of radical politics, and was probably killed by police for some mischief he might have been through. Subhash's parents are also they are so sidelined by their grief. They are somewhere, they succumb to a different sense of space, wherein they were into tremendous grief, and they barely notice Subhash's presence, as if Subhash was not there, and will not answer any of his questions about Udayan's death. So this detachment is another significant thing that we should try to understand through this novel. The only one who holds the answers Subhash seeks is Udayan's widow, his wife Gauri, who is pregnant with her late husband's child. Gauri is being isolated by Subhash's parents in a kind of combination of ritual mourning. That was a kind of custom, and their desire to age her out of the house, so that they can raise Udayan's child alone and not Gauri, within their priority. They somehow, of course, they were not okay with the marriage between Gauri and Udayan, so they didn't wish to take the responsibility of Gauri, though she was widowed. And Gauri reveals what happened the night of Udayan's death. And she and her mother-in-law came back from holiday, shopping to find policemen swarming the house. So that narration, the very return from the market, when Gauri and her mother-in-law, that is Udayan's mother, when they return home, they find that policemen, some number of policemen, they were swarming through their house, and the policemen held Gauri and her in-laws at gunpoint, and somehow they directed them to the flooded lowland where Udayan was hiding. So that very, stormy appearance of the police, the search operations, and everything was highly disturbing for the ones who were who just returned, who just happened to return from the market. The two women, they were in shock. After coaxing him out by threatening to kill members of his family, the police put Udayan into a van and let the rest of the Mitras go. So the Mitra family was relieved. They were allowed to go, but then the price was high at the cost of the life of Udayan. Now the family was allowed to return to their home, and Udayan was taken to van. The family retreated into the house, and from their terrace watched as the police executed Udayan at point blank in the middle of the field beyond the lowland. Now, this entire scene was actually observed by the members of the family from their terrace, and it was highly disturbing time for the entire family. The police took Udayan's body and never returned it. So that was the result of his involvement with the radical movement that he was involved into. Subhash is so perturbed by both the details of his brother's death and his parents' cruel and rather misfitting mistreatment of his wife Gauri, that he is unable to sleep for days. And after a group of investigators, they come to the house to question Gauri about the activities of the local CPI MLs. Subhash realizes that in order to keep Gauri safe from all these mistreatments, to keep her safe, he must marry her. That seems to be the possible solution, and he prefers to marry her himself and take her back to America so that he can offer a better life there. Gauri reluctantly agrees, though she warns Subhash that Udayan would never have wanted such an arrangement. So there is a pause in arriving at a decision from the side of Gauri, and she keeps Subhash reminding that Udayan wouldn't have agreed to such conclusion in her life. And Gauri arrives in Boston 5 months pregnant as she adjusts to life with Subhash. And she struggles with strange feelings of isolation and also a desire to pursue her education. She wanted to pursue her education, being a strong woman. She rips up her saris, cuts off her hair, and begins attending philosophy lectures at the college. And right after the birth of their daughter, the daughter whom we know as Bela in this novel, Gauri's feelings of isolation and displacement do not abet. She and Subhash, they embark on a sexual relationship. But even this release of tension does not allow Gauri to feel any peace. She has been through a number of strange experiences, rather very uncomfortable experiences, and she takes a philosophy class and does very well in it, that her teacher also recognizes and recommends that she eventually pursues a doctorate from the same university. As Gauri becomes more dedicated to her studies, her relationship with the young daughter, that is Bela, grows more and more contentious because she's not more towards her motherhood concerns, rather he's following her ambitions. And when she is at last admitted to a doctoral program in Boston, when Bela is in first grade, Subhash becomes resentful of Gauri's desire to escape their home and their marriage and now their child. So this thing was somehow, it was observed and taken up seriously by Subhash. Subhash's father dies later on in the novel, and he takes Bela now, who is 12, uh, 12 on a 6-week trip to Calcutta. So she is comparatively a grown-up child, and Subhash's mother, Bijoli, her name is Bijoli. Her mind addled by old age, spends her days caring for a cement post in the lowland, and that marks the spot where Udayan died. So everything has a space, it has some location where things happen, and often these characters, they revisit their past. After the trip, Bela, you also do find that after that particular trip, Bela and Subhash, they return to Providence to find that Gauri has left, and she has written Subhash a note in Bengali, and that note informs Subhash that she has taken a teaching job in California and is leaving Bela to Subhash. So mother is in a different role here, and the father has to look after the daughter. So as Subhash and Bela begin adjusting to life without Gauri, Bela becomes withdrawn and also loses weight. When a guidance counselor calls to report that Bela is not exactly normal, she is rather distracted in school, Subhash feels that, rather he begins taking her to see a therapist. As the months go by and Bela enters 8th grade, she begins making friends and also participating in school activities. So there is some improvement in the later course of her life, that is the life of Bela. And the summer Bela graduates from high school, Subhash receives a letter telling him that his mother has had a stroke, and he returns to India again, but this time without Bela, and Bijoli dies. His mother passes away, Subhash's mother passes away, and after Subhash returns to Rhode Island again, he brings Bela to college in the Midwest. As the years go by, she follows in Subhash's footsteps by taking up studies into environmental sciences. After graduation, however, you do find that Bela takes up an itinerant existence, by traveling across the country and working on different farms. She returns home only a couple of times a year to visit. Every time Subhash sees Bela, he is surprised by how politically minded and in some ways radical she has become, and worries that Udayan has reclaimed Bela from beyond the grave. So you do find that Udayan temperament in the character of Bela. You do find Udayan spark, or rather Udayan essence, in the character of Bela. And that is why Subhash is worried about his daughter. Meanwhile, on the west coast, Gauri lives an isolated but rather, practically speaking, a successful life, we can say so. She has published 3 books and has a tenure teaching job at a university in Southern California. And she regrets having betrayed Bela, but is too grateful for her freedom to dwell much on what she has done to her family. Subhash, now a man of 60, lives a similarly isolated existence. At the funeral of a friend from graduate school, there is a description that he meets a woman, all right, a widow and a former high school teacher of his daughter Bela, who now runs the local historical society. And she and Subhash begin seeing each other in some frequency. Subhash is, as I conveyed, he's 60 now. Bela is in her early 30s and living in Brooklyn with a cooperative of artists, nomads, and radicals. She knows that her itinerant life is due to the influence of Gauri's abandonment, but shows no sign of wanting to leave any other way. And 1 June, what do you find is, Bela returns to Rhode Island to pay a visit to her father and reveals that she is also she is pregnant and she has no relationship with the child's father anymore. And instead, she wants to raise the child on her own in Rhode Island, in the house she grew up in. And Subhash is moved to tell Bela at last the truth of her parentage. Bela reacts poorly at first, but after a trip to the coast to stay with a friend, she returns home and tells Subhash that knowing the truth does not change the fact that Subhash is her only father. Revelations are often disturbing. At this particular moment within the novel, you do realize that number of revelations, when they emerge through the surface of time, often the things, when they come to surface, they do have disturbing messages to convey. They bring about many different pictures, but then of course not all of them very pleasant, but then she has that strong faith in her concerns for her father, Subhash. She does have that strong belief that only Subhash is her father. She does not wish to acknowledge to any other truths. So if anything, she says she loves him more, knowing now all he has done for her. And that bonding between the father and the daughter, you find growing more mature in that sense. Back in California, Gauri reluctantly agrees to be interviewed by a former student for a book he is writing on the Naxalite movement. And the interview brings up painful memories and the lingering fear that she will be implicated for her tangential involvement through Udayan in the movement. One day, Gauri receives a letter from Subhash asking her to sign some papers finalizing a divorce between them. And you find that rattled, Gauri retreats into her memories of the early 1970s. Back then, she helped Udayan deliver letters on behalf of the CPI, and she was also instrumental in the killing of a prominent policeman who was against the very radical movement. And Gauri tracked the man's schedule and reported back to Udayan the times when he was off duty and unarmed, so that Udayan's group could murder him. So she again goes back into memory, all the instances that happened in the past. They will revisit her. To this day, Gauri is haunted by the things she did, those horrible things that she did to become the accomplice to Udayan in the past. And few weeks after receiving Subhash's letter, unable to compose a sufficient written response, she decides to stop in Providence on the way to a conference in London to hand Subhash the papers in person and also apologize for her actions. When Gauri rings the doorbell of her old house, however, it is Bela who answers the bell. Subhash is not home, and that is where you find Gauri sits with Bela. There is an opportunity of dialogue between the mother and the daughter, and her 4-year-old daughter also, Bela's daughter, 4-year-old Bela's daughter, attempting to make small talk and find out the details of their lives. Bela is more or less enraged by her mother's presence and refuses to answer any of her questions. That was an obvious reaction, rather predictable reaction you find in the course of this novel. She berates Gauri for leaving, telling her that she is nothing. She does not mean anything to her life. And Gauri leaves and flies to Calcutta instead of London. And she is rather determined to confront her past. So she visits the Lowland, which has been filled in and built. Now the Lowland does not exist. And it has been built up rather condominiums now stand on the site of Udayan's execution. You don't find that site as open now anymore between the two ponds, if you remember. Gauri considers committing suicide by throwing herself off the balcony of her room in a local guest house that she was staying at, but ultimately loses her will to die and returns to California. So there are range of things that happen within the minds of the characters, and many of them result into actions also, and many do not. So many actions do not come in exact shape the way the characters have thought of. Subhash and Elise now they are married, and they go on a honeymoon to Ireland, visiting a circle of stones in the countryside and seeing the flooding all around. You do find that the flooding was all around them, and Subhash again is reminded of those Lowland where his brother was killed by the policeman. So you have a lot of revisits to the past in the case of characters. What do you find is the characters they again and again go back to their past. They are forced to think about their past. They are reminded of their past again and again in the course of the novel. So when they reach to the place, the place is the place of their visit is well surrounded by the floods, and the narrative flashes back to the evening of Udayan's death. Now, this revisiting his last moments from his own perspective is very disturbing. Udayan struggles to hide from the police underwater in the flooded lowland, but cannot hold his breath long enough. He worries in his final moments underwater that his dedication to the revolution has helped no one, and instead, rather, it had sown only violence and discord, and his family had to pay a lot. As the police march Udayan across the field beyond the lowland, and he knows he will die. There is no scope of his being rescued or being spared for his crime. So he recalls meeting Gauri for a date one afternoon in front of a movie theater, and as the police's bullets rip through him, his last thoughts are of the sunlight on her hair. So they are, if you see all the characters, they are more or less they are in the course of their life only. I mean, they speak of their actions, they speak of their routine, some of the things that they happen, they happen in the course of their life, through their decisions, or even without their expectations or their consent towards progressing in the life in certain ways. But things happen to these characters, and there are a number of visits between the locations in the novel, if you observe. But the interesting thing that this novel takes us to look back in the past in terms of history, if you see, it refers to political and personal violence. This happens in this novel in both the cases, the political and also the personal violence. So we can treat this as one of the important elements, or one of the important themes within this novel. And this is probably the exploration of violence that prevailed in the 1960s India of the novel's opening pages is not even 2 decades removed from the violence of partition that was caused through the division of British in 1947. India was split into two, and that is against the backdrop that brothers Subhash and Udayan Mitra, they grew up. So though nearly inseparable in early life, you find that Subhash feels a rift deepening between himself and Udayan, the way we talked about previously. So politics is there somewhere in the backdrop, and you do find that there is another essence, or rather I should say one of the themes of the novel, that is duty and desire. There is a conflict and constant struggle between following what? Duty or desire. Both have been attempted to certain extents, and they are presented in wonderful sense of passing through generations, and that is the story of a family that comes through generations, and also takes us to something that we call the contemporariness of the things, the way ideally they are practiced in the modern day society. So by and large, what do we find in this novel is a kind of wrestle between the roles that are to be performed through duties and the actions that come through the desire. And responsibility is one of the key factors that does not limit itself here. There is a constant presence of the idea of responsibility. You can't ignore the fact that there is also reference to something that we call heritage and homeland. The association of the characters with their homeland, and of course their very sense of belonging to distinct places is very interesting one, and that can be assessed or studied very well, because often the characters are left miserable, and these characters, they somehow strive for both the places, and somehow they also cause some amount of anxiety in adapting to a new homeland. It's like uprooting and rerouting yourself into a new place. That essence is wonderfully presented. You do find this as common with Subhash and Gauri both. You do find even the element of secrets and also conspiracies. You do find this as something unique within the novel. You do find secrets and conspiracies. You do find these two things as consistent presence. Many secrets are kept throughout the novel, and they are revealed at the end. And as the story navigates further, as the progression in number of things that happen within the course of politics, revolution, terrorism, marriage, parenthood, self delusion, it passes through a number of things. But the idea of maintaining secrecy and conspiracies happening around here and there is constant. Be it family or society, these two factors are consistent, and that is what you find in this novel as one of the prominent themes. And you do also find presence in absence. To conclude with, this is how I would say that presence in absence is also one of the important feeling you find Jumpha Lahiri sharing here. You do find through the characters like Subhash, when he learns that Udayan has been killed a quarter of the way into the lowland. And the novel up to that point has largely been about Subhash navigating his brother's emotional absence. There is that wonderful bonding between the two brothers, and there is that strange disconnect also, ideological disconnect between the two brothers. So once Udayan is killed, however, within the course of the book, you do find that Udayan's physical absence, not just from Subhash's life, but also from his wife Gauri, is also well felt. Udayan becomes in death in many ways more present in the lives of those around him, and Gauri in turn. So friends, this is where we conclude our talk on The Lowland by Jumpha Lahiri. The title is not only significant but symbolic, and quite effectively it combines the political and societal concerns, also economic concerns within, and also it also talks about something that we call the idea of movement, the idea of memory, the idea of bonding in many strange ways. Strange in a way that they offer their own share of experience. I would wish that you people go through this novel and you do get to have the feel of those words that are beautifully knitted by Jumpha Lahiri in the novel The Lowland. Wish you good luck. Thank you.